That's good for her. I worry that would be overreaching.
All right, everybody, on the stream, we're ready to go.
I take some comfort in knowing that the framers and those who ratified the Constitution said that the general government will guarantee to each state a Republican form of government. And so, to the extent that a state
I'm looking to
is not
find out how to stop
doing that, then maybe the general government has the authorization, maybe they have the authority to go in and rectify
Where's the
that
one
situation. That's where I come on that particular issue. Otherwise I would be, saying, look, states, they're the sovereigns, and get the general government out of the way. But in this case, maybe some good things can happen.
I'm sorry. Hold on, everybody.
Because,
dang it!
The
I
general
had
government
this
should
ready to
guarantee
go.
to every state a Republican form of government. Last word, Lou, and then we'll let you go, my friend.
Well, just stay tuned, because we're going to continue to post information about Venezuela, about Tina Peters and her situation in the prison.
This is ridiculous. There we go. All right. All right, here we are. Ready to go. Believe it or not, we are ready to go. Come on. Where is the recording one? Boink. Boink. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show here, Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell. I'll be with you for the next hour this morning, here on the 12th day of January, 2026. So in the first 10 days of the United States under President Donald Trump has militarily attacked or threatened to attack Venezuela, Syria, Somalia, Nigeria, Colombia, Cuba, Iran, Greenland, and he has threatened to attack the state of Minnesota. Washington was also complicit in Kyiv's attempt to assassinate President Putin with a 91 drone assault last December 29, leading to Russia's second use of its awesome hypersonic Oreshnik missile system, and Trump has also announced plans to increase the U.S. annual budget by 50%, from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. And as Tucker Carlson was saying, there's only one reason why you would do that. You're ready to go to war. Now, I have been accusing the current administration of imperialism for the last 3 or 4 months. And so that's my question in the morning. Is this imperial overreach or what? Now, the first, Washington's campaign of shocked and awe, shocked, S-C-H-A-C-T, shocked, the banker for Hitler. Deadly and dangerous as it is, nonetheless is standing on a feet of clay right now. 2 of them, in fact. The first one is the London-centered Western financial system is beyond bankrupt. It responded to its 2008 blowout when global financial instruments, including the derivatives, totaled about $1.5 quadrillion. Not by trying to resolve the underlying problem, but by further inflating the speculative bubble up to 2.1 quadrillion today, which is a 40% increase. Do you know what in just the American debt, do you know what our debt payment is a year now? Our annual debt service payment to the Fed? $1 trillion. So the Western financial establishment's only plan for dealing with this onrushing systemic collapse is to revert to the old tried and true methods of Adolf Hitler's central banker, Hjalmar Schacht. Schacht was actually vetted and put in place by the City of London and the bankers there and the Wall Street bankers, and the game plan then, as again today, is to massively increase military spending. Then you want to deploy that military into wars of conquest and looting, the Auschwitz model, and in that way try to prop up their cancerous speculative bubble that continues to grow. Well, it's not going to work, as we learned back in 2008. And the dollar-based financial system is about to blow out again. One of the reasons for trying to abscond with Venezuelan oil, but I'll get into that a little later. Regardless, it's wiping out the underlying power base in the global economy. So will the majority of the world's nations and their people respond to this blowout by introducing a new financial system to ensure development? Of course, that is what BRICS is trying to do. Will the American people, will the Europeans realize that their self-interest lies in putting Wall Street and the City of London through bankruptcy, freezing the 2.1 quadrillion cancer, and joining with the global alternative for great infrastructure projects and the general welfare? It's not guaranteed, but it is an option. Now, the second clay foot is the underlying concept of man behind the imperial overreach. What I mean by that, they are relying on convincing the world that, and they, I mean the deep state of the deep state, trying to convince the world of the British philosophical hitman, Thomas Hobbes, that he was right, that man is nothing but a beast, and that the natural state of society is the war of every man against every man. And as Hobbes added, most importantly, and this is a quote directly from Hobbesian philosophy, to this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have no place. Where there is no common power, there's no law. Where there's no law, there's no justice. Force and fraud are in the war of cardinal virtues. Thus, so what does that mean? Might makes right. The greater the might, the greater the right. Who has the greater might? So the need for a Leviathan to come forth out of the ocean and by sheer force and terror rule the world. Now, taking a page from Hobbes, White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller said this January 5th in an interview with CNN. I talked about it last week, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. We live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time. What a poor concept of looking at mankind. But worse, the occupant in the White House, our dear President Trump, told the New York Times on January 8th, I think you remember this, that when he was asked, what can limit you? What is there to limit you? Obviously, the interview was coming from the point of view recognizing that America has dropped its constitutional empowerment and picked up the banner of imperialism, what the Roman Empire did, what the British Empire did. Success through global conquest. And so he was asked, and I forget the name of the lady, but he was asked, what limit is there on you? Because obviously Congress is not limiting him. And remember what his answer was? He said, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me. I don't need international law. Well, is the Hobbesian concept of mankind true? Is it consistent with the known laws of the physical universe? That the dog-eat-dog idea is the only way mankind can survive? Well, the 15th century golden renaissance proved otherwise. So did the 19th century German classical period, as did the American Revolution. And so here, as we are moving in the 250th anniversary of that revolution, The overreaching, collapsing, London-centered empire once again has a lot to fear. And that is my stated mission on my radio program, to bring that to an end. Now, if that wasn't enough imperialism, President Trump has posted the following yesterday on Truth Social, yesterday morning. Quote, Cuba lived for many years on large amounts of oil and money from Venezuela. In return, Cuba provided security services for the last two Venezuelan dictators, but not anymore. Most of those Cubans are dead from last week's USA attack, and Venezuela doesn't need protection anymore from the thugs and the extortionists who held them hostage for so many years. Venezuela now has the United States of America, the most powerful military in the world, to protect them. And protect them we will. There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba, zero. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it's too late. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT. Now, commenting on a user's post that was under that user posted under that item, saying that the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will become the president of Cuba. You know what Trump said? Sounds good to me. You can't make this up. So Cuba's oil situation obviously is very dire at the moment. The needed domestic consumption is about 150,000 barrels per day, with Cuba producing about half of that, 50,000. And the needed 100,000 imports have plummeted in recent years. Venezuela has historically been the main foreign provider to Cuba. But according to Kapler, who monitors this stuff, its shipments of about 35,000 barrels per day in 2020 plunged to only 10 in 2024 and this last year as a result of sanctions. And now, of course, that we have shut down and absconding with the tankers leaving Venezuela for Cuba, their import has dropped to zero. Now, Mexico, who was Cuba's second largest supplier, exported 12,000 barrels per day in 2025, which constituted 44% of the total imports of oil, and Russia has historically provided some oil to Cuba in the area of 5,000 to 10,000 barrels per day. So Trump's latest threats to Cuba, coupled with warnings to Mexico that they're to get the next Venezuela treatment, especially if they try to come to Cuba's aid, means that Cuba is about to get the Gaza treatment. And you can write that one down. Those poor people. And then Marco Rubio becoming the president of Cuba. Well, speaking of Rubio, another thing before I move on. President Trump has ramped up his verbal threats recently in the midst of all this stuff against Iran. Media reports say that he has now provided, with his war council or whatever you call it, all of the what's necessary for military options. So when he met with Netanyahu back on December 29th, Trump made a very generic threat. And this was in the press. He said this: I hear that Iran is trying to build up again. And if they are, we're going to knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them. Then he qualified his statement saying he hoped that they weren't building up. Excuse me. At that time, there were no organized riots in Iran. Just the first day of merchants protesting the massive inflation that Iran is undergoing. I mean, it was 4 days before all of the armed provocateurs showed up. So, this last Friday, speaking to U.S. oil executives, Trump said this: I've made the statement very strongly that if they, Iran, start killing people like they have in the past, we're going to get involved. will be hitting them very hard where it hurts. That does not mean boots on the ground. But it does mean hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. So we don't want that to happen. So the very next day, Netanyahu calls on U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and according to Reuters' citation of an Israeli official who was present for that call, the possibilities of U.S. intervention in the next attack on Iran was discussed. Now, Marco Rubio's State Department posted a video on its English language site of the nighttime raid on Venezuela with a message to Iran. Don't play games with President Trump. When he says he'll do something, he means it. And Trump posted this afterwards. Iran is looking for freedom. Perhaps like never before, the U.S. stands ready to help. Now, the New York Times has reported, based on senior U.S. officials, that various military options have been presented to Trump and that he is seriously considering authorizing a strike. So various reports have the opinions and options, including strikes against Iran's security services and non-military targets. However, there's concern expressed that an intervention may galvanize the Iranian public to unite in support of the government, just like what happened in Venezuela. There is no evidence that thousands and tens of thousands of people were in the streets of Caracas and elsewhere in Venezuela celebrating the expulsion of Marcos. I mean, the president and his wife. No evidence of it at all, even though it seemed the Western press seemed to cover it. And now there's conflicting information coming out of the Iranian population. However, the concern was expressed that an intervention may galvanize the Iranian public to come together and then support the government as they are doing in Venezuela. So one senior U.S. military official was cited to say that more time was needed to consolidate the U.S. military positions and prepare defenses for any possible retaliatory strikes by Iran. Now, interestingly enough, in the midst of that discussion going back and forth, what did Russia do with its passported citizens in Israel? Did you see that in the news? Putin told the Russian citizens in Israel right now, Jewish or non-Jewish, get the hell out. Get out of Israel right now. What does Putin know? Does Putin know those thousands of missiles that Iran still has that are aimed at Israel will be launched now that we know the Iron Dome is a fraud? So the Telegraph, Britain's daily, said that Trump would be briefed on the 13th, that's tomorrow, on a series of reported non-lethal measures, including amplifying anti-government criticism online and deploying secretive cyber weapons against the Iranian military and civilian sites. Like, somehow that's going to make a difference? I slept too close to an open window last night, and my throat's a little scratchy. I'm sorry for coughing. Now, I want to mention a couple of things about Greenland. During his meeting with oil executives yesterday, reporters that were present asked President Trump about his plans for Greenland, and he said, "I'm not talking about money for Greenland." Then he said, "Yet, I might talk about that. But right now, we're going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't, Russia and China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor." Then he said, I would like to make a deal, the easy way. But if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way. Then asked why resort to force when the U.S. already has full military and other access to Greenland already. Trump applied his extensive knowledge of New York real estate negotiations to the thornier tax of statecraft. He said, because when we own it, we defend it. You don't defend the lease the same way. You have to own it. Well, from a real estate position, I can understand him saying that. Now, the London Daily Mail, which is not always the most accurate source of strategic intelligence, reported Saturday that sources had informed them that Trump has ordered his senior commanders to draw up a plan for invasion of Greenland, a move that could potentially lead to the complete collapse of NATO. RT said this. The report said that the push to seize Greenland was led by several Trump advisors, including political aide Stephen Miller, who were emboldened by the recent U.S. attack on Venezuela and now want to move quickly to secure that island before Russia or China could make a move. Is Greenland too big to be an island? Even on the United Nations map, the flat Earth map that the United Nations uses, Greenland, it's like calling Australia an island. Greenland is huge. All right, now, I was going to get into the massive anti-ICE rallies in thousands of cities and towns across the U.S., but there's something here that's stuck in my craw. In Minneapolis, there have been nearly a constant presence of protesters since the January 7th murder of Renee Nicole Good by the ICE agent Jonathan Ross. But over this weekend, tens of thousands of people marched to the murder site as part of more than 1,000 rallies have been planned nationwide. And these ICE out for good is what they're calling it, were overwhelmingly peaceful. However, an estimated $6,000 of damages was caused when a group of protesters tried to storm the Hilton Canopy Hotel in Minneapolis in the belief that ICE agents were living there during the enforcement surge. Minneapolis police arrested 29 people at 2 of these hotels. Minneapolis protesters braved the bitter cold wind and snowy roads. Minneapolis protesters were chanting, "No justice, no peace, get ICE off the streets. No justice, no peace, get ICE off the streets. Hey, hey, ho, ho, ICE has got to go." Such originality. So speaking at a January 10th press conference, the Minneapolis mayor said that the demonstrations had remained mostly peaceful and that anyone damaging property or engaging in unlawful activity would be arrested by police. And then the mayor said, "We will not counter Donald Trump's chaos with our own brand of chaos. He wants us to take the bait." Now, I have an issue with the video. And you've seen the video that's got everybody all upset, where you see this ICE officer outside the window on the left side of the car, and they're basing everything on the way that she's turning the wheels. And so she turns the wheels of the car to the left to back up, which would be an obvious movement away from this ICE agent. But what they're not talking about is the ICE agent that's in front of the car. They talk about this guy on the side like he's in front of it. He isn't. He's on the side. He's on the driver's side. But there's a couple of frames of the film where all you see is about the upper half of the chest and the head of the ICE agent that's in front of the car. And then as she turns her wheels to the right, after having backed up with the wheels to the left to move away from the officer at the window. She is now pointed directly at the officer in front of the car. And they're not talking about this. I've seen it on the video myself. So I have a hard time blaming ICE. I'm all for law and order and carrying out what is necessary to establish the law. And the very nature of ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, is not a Santa Claus kind of picture, no matter how you paint it. But I do believe, unlike a lot of people in the current administration, the rule of law still should be applied. I just don't understand why they're not telling the truth about that video. So we'll see how that unfolds. The State Department is warning U.S. citizens to leave Venezuela immediately. This came out Saturday. The State Department issued a warning on Saturday, January 10th, advising all citizens in Venezuela to leave the country immediately. There are reports of groups of armed militias known as colectivos setting up roadblocks and searching vehicles for evidence of U.S. citizenship or support for the United States. So, the statement says, remain vigilant and exercise caution when traveling by road. So the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry responded promptly, denying the danger exists. In a social media post on January 10th, they said that the State Department's security alert is based on fabricated accounts aimed at creating a perception of risk that does not exist. They said that Venezuela is in absolute calm, peace, and stability, and that all weapons are in the government's control. Really? All weapons? There aren't any bad guys with weapons? There aren't any pro-government patriots who recognize that their president was kidnapped from them, that might not want some recompense on the road when they stop somebody identified as an American? We don't need to worry about that because the government has all weapons under control. Now, the Russian ambassador to Venezuela, Sergei Bagdasarov, said on air with the SL television live January 10th, in fact, the current situation in the country is quite stable. The authorities confidently control public order. Then President Trump, writing on Truth Social, I have canceled the previously expected second wave of attacks, which looks like it won't be needed. However, all ships are going to stay in place for safety and security. He added that the Venezuelan government had released large numbers of political prisoners, which he called very important and a smart gesture. The Delcy Rodriguez government said this has been done as a gesture to seek peace. And of course, these are the political prisoners of the previous administration. Now, Cuba's leadership has responded sharply to President Trump's threats to starve the island of oil while ordering the Cuban government to make a deal or else. The island of Cuba is now on full military alert and defense mobilization in what is being called a war of all the people. On National Defense Day, Saturday, military exercises were held in the provinces of Santiago, Matanzas, Sierra Maestra, La Tunas, Cienfuegos, and Camagüey, where the attacks on communications infrastructure and the bombing of a rum factory were simulated. No, not the rum. Anyway, various contingencies are being discussed, especially the implications of a shortage of fuel. So in a message reported by the Communist Party Daily, Granma, Granma, anyway, on yesterday, Sunday, President Miguel Diaz-Canel warned that Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign nation. Nobody tells us what to do, he said. Cuba does not attack. It has been attacked by the U.S. for 66 years. We do not threaten, but we prepare, willing to defend the homeland on the last drop of blood. Moreover, he added, the United States doesn't have the moral authority to accuse us of anything. Those who turn everything into a business, including human lives, those who hysterically rail against our nation, do so sick with rage over the sovereign decision of this people to choose their own political model. So anyway, they say that their people stand ready, willing, and prepared to die if necessary against any subjugation that the U.S. may try to bring about. All right, now a little bit about the Oreshnik, because this is definitely a step up in the game. So this would have been Friday, a strike near Lviv in western Ukraine by a Russian hypersonic Oreshnik missile, certainly was registered in the Western media, albeit some downplay to the damage that was done. But the New York Times was fairly blunt as its headline made clear. This is Saturday. Putin delivers a warning to Europe at Mach 10. The article said the strike sent a message to Europe days after its leaders agreed to post-war security guarantees. You know, it's like the Western European leaders remind me of the Keystone Cops, or worse, maybe the Little Rascals, because they keep making all of these flutterings of ideas and answers to how to achieve a ceasefire, which there won't be a ceasefire. There'll be an end of fire, not a ceasefire, without ever sitting down with the Russians to talk about it, until Friedrich Merz finally said, he admitted it Saturday, the Russians need to be included in these discussions. So although there is no question that the surreal announcement by the coalition of the willing that they were prepared to send troops to the Ukraine, despite almost weekly repeated Russian warnings that they would become military targets the minute they crossed the border, was very much on the minds, obviously, of the Russian leaders. The official explanation of the Russian Ministry of Defense was that the Oreshnik missile was in response my little robot vacuum cleaner just woke up for some reason. Was in response to the attack on his life on December 29th, with 91 drove swarm headed towards his place, even though Trump said, nah, he was just close to what the military target was. No, the New York Times argued, citing experts, Friday's strike was not primarily about any attack on the presidential dacha. Said the message came screaming through the skies at 8,000 miles per hour, but they claimed that it reportedly inflicted little damage, leaving a couple of unimpressive craters in the frozen earth. Then the message, they argued, was mainly political. By firing the Oreshnik, which has a range covering almost all of Europe, Moscow showed how it could carry out its threat both inside Ukraine and well beyond. Now, the Associated Press's account emphasized that Russia, quote, used a powerful new hypersonic missile that struck western Ukraine in a clear warning to Kyiv's NATO allies. Then they noted correctly, of course, that the Oreshnik is nuclear capable, and that it gives Russia a new element of psychological warfare, unnerving the Ukrainians and intimidating Western countries that aid Ukraine. Sky News also emphasized the threat to Europe and that this brings the use of such systems ever closer to NATO territory than its previous use in November of 2024, which struck at the central Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Given Oreshnik's reputation as a missile that can pulverize underground bunkers, the wider security implications for Ukrainian and NATO infrastructure, like military and storage facilities, cannot be ignored. Now, after the EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, who is a rather laughable creature, once again made a fool of herself by responding to the Russian Oreshnik strike in western Ukraine by proclaiming that the EU countries have to dig deeper into their air defense stock. So the Russian Special Presidential Envoy on Foreign Investment and Economic Cooperation, Kirill Dmitriev, who I quote all the time, said this on X. Kaja Kallas is not very bright or knowledgeable, but even she should know that there are no air defenses against the Oreshnik hypersonic Mach 10 missile. So Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, responded in his own inimitable way in the English language post on X, saying this. The ruling European dimwits want a war in Europe after all. And it's been said 1,000 times, Russia won't accept any European or NATO troops in the Ukraine. Well, come on then, because this is what you're going to get. Attaching videos of the Oreshnik strike. Now, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're available. They look like lightning strikes. I don't know what the speed of a lightning bolt is. When, you look at lightning storms and you see the little glow inside the clouds as there's cloud-to-cloud lightning transmission. And then every now and then, bam, a lightning bolt hits the earth. And it looks almost instantaneous, doesn't it? Now, if you look at it slowed down on photography, you can see how the lightning bolt is generated, how it doesn't come down straight like a ruler edge. It comes down kind of branching and forking in different directions and may spread into two and come back into one or whatever else, as the electronegativity that's judging this thing and creating this thing operates. But in real time, it looks almost instantaneous. Well, I saw several videos from different directions that were published by people who were recording these things on their smartphones. And they look like lightning strikes. Now, that Oreshnik, if you've been studying it like I have, you know that its first stage is to propel it up into the highest area of the atmosphere, almost out of the atmosphere. Then the second stage ignites and takes it up to the very top of the arc before it comes down. And the second stage separates. Of course, my mind was, well, if it's up there that far, 100,000 miles, whatever it is, those stages have to fall back down to the earth, and they're not coming down with a parachute. You'd think that they would do enough damage by themselves when they hit. But that third stage is the nozzle, the nose of this missile, that has 6 warheads in it. Each one of those warheads has its own rocket engines. So that when it hits the very top of the arc and starts to come down, that cone opens up, the 6 warheads come out. And at this point, they're just kinetic explosions. But these things made out, I don't know, carbon steel, whatever it is they're made out of, because they weigh tons apiece, being fueled by rocket engines on the backside of each of these warheads, will hit the Earth at Mach 10, 10 times the speed of sound. Now they can easily carry, now the Oreshnik can easily carry nuclear warheads. And the reports on the ground are different than what the Ukrainian government is reporting. What the Ukrainian government is saying, well, it just made a couple of unimpressionable holes in the ground. Whereas the people on the ground said, there goes the gas, there goes the electric. Now we're freezing. This was in response to trying to kill Putin. Some of the drones that were used against Putin's residents, as I reported last week, still had some of its electronic guidance systems intact. They were delivered to the American attaché in Moscow and said, here, take it. You download the information in there. Here's how you do it. You go download it. You'll see where it was launched from based on GPS monitoring using American satellites. You'll see where it hit precisely. And the obvious target is the residence of Putin in the Valdai. Take this to your leader. Take this to your leader in the States. And the West is still saying, no, there may have been a stray one, but it was really intended for this military site that's miles and miles away from Putin's residence. Now, the same night that Russia's Oreshnik hypersonic missile strikes target in Lviv, the details of which haven't completely come out, but I said there's conflicting information. Russia launched a swarm of Geron drones at targets in Kyiv. They set fire to two major thermal power plants, the TETS-4 and the TETS-6, with major consequences. So the Kyiv mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, wrote on his Telegram channel Saturday, some 6,000 apartment buildings in the Ukrainian capital, half of the total, have been left without central heating. Therefore, I appeal to residents of the capital who have the opportunity to temporarily leave the city where there are alternative sources of heat and power to do so. So hundreds of thousands of buildings in the large industrial city of Dnipro and other parts of eastern and southern Ukraine are also without power and heat. A situation that obviously is going to affect the Ukrainian army's frontline logistics. So the Russians have had enough. Now that their own president has been targeted for assassination by 91 drones, they realize they cannot sit down and talk to anybody. So they're going to push. They're going to push hard for the end of this war. Even they are mentioning war. They're not saying special military operations so much anymore. They're referring to it as war, and they want it over with. And I think you're going to see between now and the end of the month a tremendous push forward. To clean this thing up. Now, the whole world, as I've looked at world news and world reports, still in a state of shock after the intervention in Venezuela by the special forces that picked up Maduro and brought him to the United States, according to sources, an extremely terrible jail in New York. Now, I was listening there on Lowell's program just before I got on, a replay with Lou, a fellow named Lou, who was talking about how there's no jurisdiction for state jails as opposed to federal jails. That doesn't matter. Nothing against Lou. You think the government, for 1 second, is going to sit back and obey the law after the lawless kidnapping of Maduro? Well, this, in a certain sense, comes as a shock. Not so much that it's the first time the United States has ever occupied another country, or that this is the first time the United States has made an interventionist war. I think what shocked the whole world this time is the absolutely blatant character of the whole operation. And also what is following after it makes clear that as of now, international law, as developed with the UN Charter, and out of the process of the Peace of Westphalia, which was a very important process to establish international law, that phase is now over. The observance of international law is now over. There is no more international law. The American Special Forces have made that very clear. It's been replaced by might makes right and the law of the jungle, and whoever has the biggest gun is going to establish policy. Now that obviously is uncorking and unleashing all kinds of things, ranging from an attempt to possibly annex Greenland in some form, which is now on the agenda. But naturally, there are many other instabilities in the world resulting out of this. And it just, when there is no international law, then might does make right. And I used the analogy last time with King Arthur in the movie Camelot with Richard Harris, where Arthur is sitting around, might makes right, might makes right, might for right, he says. And that's the creation of the Round Table. That the knights of the Round Table would use the might of Arthur's army and forces to establish right, not for conquest. Well, to say that we have international law or we don't have international law, where the danger is that these tendencies will develop a dynamic of their own, which it seems to be happening, leading to a potential not far in the future of global nuclear war. Now, Dennis Kucinich, who I really have a lot of respect for, made some interesting comments at the International Peace Conference over the weekend. He said this: well, I don't have time to get into. I'm going to summarize. I don't have enough time left to get into it deeply. But anyway, what he was alluding to is following the intervention in Venezuela, Trump has now announced that he wants to increase the U.S. military budget from $1 trillion, which is already an amazing figure in and of itself, to $1.5 trillion, a 50% increase. And as I said earlier in the program, that's exactly what Tucker Carlson said. There's only one reason for that: war. Now, on a bit of a peaceful note, I want to do a little commercial here for my practice, and then I'll finish off the show. We have had so much demand, and I really appreciate it, for this half-off special for new patients in the clinic, ranging from anything from migraine headache patterns, neck pain, shoulder pain, mid-back pain, scapular pain, low back pain, sciatica, various kinds of neuralgia, peripheral problems, numbness, tingling, pins and needles, pain that just doesn't seem to be relieved. Man, that's a natural for what we do, and we have so many happy people after 1 or 2 visits to the clinic. So I've decided to continue this special for the people who haven't been able to afford what we do. Half off still goes for the K-Talk audience. There are other people coming in who do not get that benefit. But for the K-Talk listeners, the K-Talk people who want to just come in and talk about their problems, I'll give you several minutes to just sit there. You're scheduled for a half-hour consultation. I don't take care of you. You're scheduled for me to take care of you, but I don't take care of you unless you decide that's what you want to do. If you don't, as I said, we'll still be friends. You can go on your way. But we're going to continue this for a little while later. I think I am packed this week and next week for new patient visits. But We'll try to open up spaces wherever we can to get you in there if that's what you want. You call 801-523-1890, or you go to jackstockwell.com and try to schedule there with the online scheduler. One way or the other, we'll get you scheduled. And I am so grateful to the K-Talk audience for allowing this to take place, because there's so many more people we've been able to help now. All right, now, back to a 50% increase in the military budget. Why in the world would you do that? What do you have in mind that you need another 50% increase when you look at how woefully our enlistment numbers and all the services are? When you look at how woefully low our armament inventory is, because we gave almost all of it to the Ukraine. When you look at how far we are behind China and Russia in hypersonic weapons, whatever could that 500 billion be for? And who's lining up for it? Well, the members of Congress who's going to make sure this gets through. This is how you get into Congress with a $800,000 net worth, and few terms later, you're worth $50 million. And, of course, for their campaign funds. And they're not going to police themselves over this. I've always made fun of the fact that when a president announces his intention to run for the presidency, if he has any chance of getting in there, he's already been bought and sold 10 times over. And no matter what you think that exists in the way of shadows behind these people, it's 10 times worse than you think. Now, with that bit of hopeful information, what supposedly justifies this 50% increase is that Trump wants to have a dream of an army defending itself against all possible foes. A lot of people, as I said, Tucker Carlson commented on it, saying this is that Trump isn't just planning on war, he's planning on global war. And it does not make any sense otherwise. Why in the world would you do that? So if you take the proposed U.S. 1.5 billion, 1.5 trillion military budget, which, by the way, has set the shares in military industrial firms skyrocketing, by the way. If you've invested in silver and gold, God bless you. If you've invested in big pharma and big food, God bless you. You're making a lot of money. But now you may want to move some of that money into death, because the stock values, for example, the Swedish firm Saab, which makes missiles, not just a car, has increased 25%. Rheinmetall has increased 20%. And others are growing up significantly. That obviously has to be seen together with the militarization that's going on in the European Union right now. Germany has stated several times, Pistorius, the defense minister, they want to become the strongest army of Europe, which has caused even Putin to make remarks saying that Russia notes the fact and is prepared to answer any attack appropriately, vis-a-vis the Oreshnik. And the Oreshnik, along with the Iskander, and we've got lots of them, the defense ministry says, hypersonic missiles, extremely accurate. The Oreshnik has to go way up and then come down. It needs that kinetic force. But the Iskander can fly right off the surface of the earth. You can't stop it either. I wonder what that would be like, to be standing out, say in a soccer field, watching your kids playing soccer, and barely 1,000 feet above the ground, at Mach 10, an Iskander missile flying overhead. Wonder if you'd even be able to see it. Well, naturally, the militarization of Germany isn't restricted to Germany. It's spread to Japan, where now, according to various sources, Japan is trying to acquire nuclear weapons, which has caused the Chinese to make a report being very upset by the ongoing efforts of Japan to either have nuclear weapons themselves or to participate in U.S. weapons, which is the arrangement which already exists with Germany and some other European countries. So then naturally, a little bit more on Greenland. The natural, we have any time left? Yeah, we do. The absolutely hair-raising, I thought it was a joke at one time, the hair-raising development, which is showing that there is no end to this madness, is the fact that both President Trump as well as Vice President Vance have stated repeatedly they're going to take over Greenland. Now, Greenland does have some autonomous status, but otherwise belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark. And according to a lot of statements, the Greenlanders, if they want a change in status, what they want is not for the United States to take them over, but to become free of Denmark and to have independence and not be part of the United States. So when the spokeswoman of the White House was asked if military means would be an option, she said, yeah, all options are on the table with the president. Then some statements were made saying, maybe we'll just try to buy Greenland, which has been discussed many times before. I mean, if you've got pockets big enough for another $500 billion military budget, you ought to have a billion or two there for the Greenlanders. And there have been efforts to calculate how much it would cost to bribe each of the Greenlanders by buying each individual out. In any case, the argument given is that supposedly Greenland would become a big threat to the United States because of Russian and Chinese missiles, which is just completely ludicrous. There has been no sign whatsoever that either Russia or China would ever do that. I mean, it's just absolutely blatant. Even the Prime Minister Tusk from Poland, who is more or less in the war party of the coalition of the willing, has now also, like the Prime Minister of Denmark, Frederiksen, said that if this happens, it will make NATO pointless. Because if you have a tension or a quarrel or warlike actions within NATO, NATO will then fall apart. So in a joke, I just want to say that maybe Trump would do some military action if the net result is that NATO would go. But you shouldn't make jokes about such terrible things. Someone pointed that out to me the other day. Maybe what Trump has in mind is the end of NATO, and so that if he violates the 5th article of NATO, and the nations of NATO do not come to defend Greenland or Denmark against the United States aggression, would be the end of NATO. Well, that kind of makes sense, but I think there's more to it than that. And then the other thing, and I kind of want to finish this, we only got a couple of minutes. Even though it was not played up in the media that much, is the fact that this drone attack with 91 drones on the residence of President Putin in Novgorod, Valdai, where there is also a nuclear command center, just because it hasn't been picked up very heavily by Western media, doesn't mean it's sitting there on the agenda of every discussion of the foreign ministry and the War Department of the Russian Federation. Because it's an absolute assassination attempt against Putin. But according to the Russian Defense Ministry statements, they were able to neutralize all of the drones. But the implication is still incredible. Because if that would have been successful and Putin would have been killed, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But neither would you. We would already be in an escalation way beyond the lost spiral of confrontation. Trump initially said he got a phone call from Putin. He was very, very angry about it. Then a little time later, he said no, he reversed his position. Trump said it was all a lie. It didn't happen. It was all made up by Putin. The President of the United States, after he got off with the phone of the President of the Russian Federation, said the President of the Russian Federation was lying. What do you do with that? Did Trump know about the attack ahead of time? Was he misbriefed by his own security team? The CIA, some analysts have mooted that the CIA may have provided the Ukrainians with the information about the location of where Putin supposedly would be. In any case, the Russian Defense Ministry provided, as I've said several times, the U.S. military attaché in Moscow with the evidence that it was a drone attack, where they came from, who was aiming it, and who programmed the drones. And of course, what did you hear from the West? Crickets. If the head of the strongest nuclear power on the planet would have been killed in a decapitation strike, we would definitely at that point be at the point of no return. That has to be kept in mind as we are all experiencing a worsening environment around us. All right. I think that's going to do it for today. There'll be more, I guarantee, there'll be more stuff to talk about tomorrow. Those of you on the stream, if you like and subscribe as well as share, it will increase our numbers. But I'm going to end the stream at this point. Thank you for your patience in listening to the program. I will be back